the birthday of silence. The evening air carried a faint chill that hinted of approaching rain as Victoria Hayes stepped out of the taxi in front of Le Jardin, the most elegant dining establishment in the city's heart. The glass facade shimmered beneath the golden glow of chandeliers within, reflecting her solitary figure back at her like a mirror that refused to flatter. She paused before entering, smoothing the skirt of her emerald silk dress, the same one she had bought 2 years ago but never found a reason to wear until now. Her 32nd birthday, a milestone that should have been filled with laughter and the warmth of friends, instead felt like a ceremony of endurance, an event to mark time rather than celebrate it. The valet greeted her with professional cheer, taking her umbrella, and the hostess at the podium smiled with mechanical perfection. "Good evening, Miss Hayes. Table for one?" Those 3 words, "table for one," struck like a pin to her chest, reminding her that even amid the hum of conversation, she was here alone. She nodded, forcing a polite smile, pretending she didn't feel the gaze of couples and groups, as she followed the hostess to a window table overlooking the glistening streets below. Outside, the city was alive, car headlights slicing through the drizzle, pedestrians hurrying under umbrellas, the world continuing its rhythm while she sat apart from it. Inside, violins played softly over speakers, waiters moved with choreographed grace, and every table seemed to hold a story of connection. She had come prepared for solitude. She had promised herself that she would not cry tonight, not let self-pity stain her carefully composed mask. Her phone buzzed with a few perfunctory messages, a text from her sister apologizing for missing dinner, a brief call earlier from her father who had managed to make even happy birthday sound like an item on a to-do list, and a cheerful voicemail from her best friend who was overseas. She appreciated them all, but appreciation was not the same as feeling seen. She ordered a glass of red wine, folding her napkin neatly on her lap, as if precision could fill the emptiness across the table. When the wine arrived, she lifted the glass slowly, watching the candlelight tremble through the crimson liquid. For a moment she tried to toast herself, to the years she had survived, to the dreams that hadn't yet given up on her. But the gesture felt hollow. The waiter asked whether she would like to order now. She nodded and murmured, "The seared salmon, please." As he walked away, her eyes drifted again to the city outside. Rain had begun to fall more steadily, streaking the window with rivers of light. It was beautiful and distant, like everything she wanted but couldn't reach. She was thinking about the last birthday she had shared with someone, 5 years ago when her mother was still alive. Catherine Hayes had been the kind of woman who made ordinary days feel like art. Even after her passing, Victoria still sometimes woke, expecting to smell her mother's favorite lavender perfume drifting through the house. It was that memory, tender and painful, that made birthdays harder each year. She didn't notice the tall man at first. He had entered quietly, his presence folding seamlessly into the ambiance of the room. But as he walked past the bar, the maitre d' greeted him by name. "Mr. Cross, welcome back!" And something about the low warmth in that exchange made her glance up. Their eyes met briefly, hers uncertain, his calm and measured, before he looked away and took a seat at the far end of the dining room. She exhaled, returning her attention to her meal when it arrived, beautifully plated but tasteless in her mouth. It was as she was tracing patterns on the tablecloth with her fingertip that she heard a voice behind her. Deep, smooth, tinged with a hint of mischief. Say, "Forgive me for interrupting, but I believe I'm your birthday gift." The word startled her enough that her glass nearly tipped. She looked up, and there he was, standing beside her table with a disarming smile. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit, the kind of man whose quiet confidence filled the space more than his height or his looks. His hair was dark, brushed back, a few silver threads catching the light. But it was his eyes, clear gray like rain over steel, that unsettled her most. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice catching between amusement and suspicion. He smiled again, not the polished smile of someone who had rehearsed charm, but one that reached his eyes. "You heard me right. I'm your birthday gift. You shouldn't have to celebrate alone." Victoria blinked, torn between laughing and calling for the waiter. Is this a joke? Do you do this often? Sit down at strangers' tables and make bold declarations. Never, he said, and there was an honesty in his tone that made her pause. But sometimes when you see something, someone, that feels like fate is trying to tap you on the shoulder, you decide not to ignore it. Every instinct told her this was absurd. Yet there was something disarming about his manner. He didn't loom, didn't invade her space, just stood there waiting, an invitation in human form. She gestured uncertainly to the empty chair. All right, sit down then. Let's see what kind of gift you are. He took the seat with a grace that suggested old-fashioned upbringing. The waiter returned, surprise flickering across his face, but adapted quickly, setting another place. Would you like something to drink, sir? Whiskey, neat. Thank you. When the waiter left, Victoria folded her hands together. So what's your name, mysterious birthday gift? Daniel Cross, he said. And you're Victoria Hayes. The hostess said it when you arrived. She raised a brow. So you were listening? Guilty, he admitted. But only because I couldn't help noticing how composed you looked walking in. Like someone determined not to let the world see that she's carrying too much on her own. That unexpected observation hit closer than she liked. You're perceptive for a stranger? Occupational hazard, he said lightly. I work in analysis. Numbers, markets, people. They all tell stories if you watch closely enough. An analyst who believes in fate? She asked. He shrugged, the corner of his mouth lifting. Some things don't belong to logic. The conversation that followed unfolded like a melody she hadn't realized she knew. They talked of travel, of favorite cities, of art and architecture. He told her about living abroad, about how cities had personalities just like people. London stoic, Tokyo disciplined, New York restless. She found herself laughing, genuinely, for the first time that day. There was something magnetic in the ease of it, as if the loneliness she had carried into the restaurant had been quietly pushed aside. Dinner passed in a blur of connection. When the waiter brought dessert, Daniel ordered chocolate torte with 2 forks. It feels wrong to eat cake alone on your birthday, he said. When the plate arrived, a single candle flickered in the center. She stared at it, her throat tightening. Make a wish, he whispered, her eyes closed. She didn't wish for wealth or success or love. She wished simply not to feel alone anymore, to find whatever it was that would make her heart feel alive again. When she opened her eyes, Daniel was watching her with quiet intensity. I hope it comes true, he said softly. They talked until the restaurant began to empty. When they finally stood to leave, he held out his hand. I'd like to see you again, Victoria, if you'll let me. Something inside her, and the cautious part that usually took control, wanted to say no. But the ache of solitude had already begun to thaw, replaced by the fragile warmth of possibility. All right, she said. Coffee, maybe? Tomorrow, he replied instantly, as though he had been waiting for that permission. There's a cafe near the Botanical Gardens. 2 o'clock? She nodded. He smiled, and the sincerity in that smile undid her defenses entirely. When Victoria returned home that night, rain still fell softly against her windows, but it sounded different. Less like isolation, more like a lullaby. She set her purse on the counter, removed her earrings, and caught sight of herself in the mirror. There was a light in her eyes she hadn't seen in years, a shimmer of hope. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared from an unknown number. Good night, birthday girl. Sweet dreams, Daniel. She stood there for a long moment, smiling without meaning to, before replying, Good night, Daniel. Thank you for the gift. Then she turned off the lights and lay in bed listening to the rain, unaware that this night, this quiet, improbable encounter, was not coincidence at all, but the first ripple of something extraordinary that had been set in motion long before she stepped into that restaurant. Echoes of the past the next day unfolded in slow, careful hours, like a fragile song Victoria didn't want to rush. Morning sunlight spilled across her apartment floor, painting golden rectangles on the pale wooden panels. She sat on the edge of her bed, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, still replaying every moment of the previous night. The candlelight, The warmth in Daniel's eyes, the strange, sudden sense of connection that felt both new and oddly familiar. It had been so long since she'd felt truly seen. For years, she had built walls out of schedules and ambition, finding safety in her routines and solitude, convincing herself she didn't need anyone. But now, those walls felt softer, almost transparent, as though the simple act of someone sitting down across from her had let light seep through the cracks. By noon, her thoughts were a restless storm. She had tried to focus on work emails, on architectural sketches scattered across her desk, but every line she drew curved unconsciously into the outline of a man's face. At 1 o'clock, she gave up pretending, closed her laptop, and went to her wardrobe. Choosing an outfit felt unexpectedly important. She wanted to look like herself, but the best version of herself, the one that still believed in beginnings. She settled on dark jeans, a cream sweater, and a light trench coat. Minimal makeup, a hint of lipstick. Her reflection looked back with cautious optimism. A woman who had been tired for too long but was ready to hope again. The cafe near the botanical gardens was small, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. Glass walls framed the green expanse beyond, where autumn leaves fell in lazy spirals to the ground. She arrived early, ordered a cappuccino, and chose a table by the window. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and roasted beans. She wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. Outside, children chased pigeons between puddles left by the morning rain. The world felt lighter, cleaner somehow, as if the storm had washed away more than just dust. When Daniel appeared at precisely 2 o'clock, she noticed him before he saw her, the easy confidence in his stride, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair. He spotted her through the glass, and his smile bloomed like something genuine, not practiced. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw recognition deeper than familiarity, as if seeing her again confirmed something he'd known all along. "You came," he said softly when he reached the table, his tone half relief, half wonder. "Of course," she replied, smiling. "I promised coffee." He ordered black coffee, then leaned back, studying her the way someone might study a painting they had waited years to see again. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full, rich with things that didn't need to be said yet. When he finally spoke, his voice carried warmth that made people nearby glance and smile unconsciously. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he confessed. "Most people wake up after nights like that and decide the stranger at their table was a bad idea." She laughed quietly. "I considered it. But then I realized I hadn't laughed like that in months." That seemed reason enough. Conversation flowed easily again, winding from small talk into deeper terrain. Childhood memories, dreams half realized, regrets they rarely voiced. Daniel spoke about growing up near the coast, how he used to sketch ships as a boy, dreaming of adventure. Victoria told him about her mother's art, how their home had once smelled of turpentine and roses, how she used to sit beneath her mother's easel listening to soft humming. Daniel listened with unbroken attention, his expression shifting with her words, as if every detail mattered. It was that intensity, the way he looked at her when she spoke, that both comforted and unnerved her. Few people truly listen anymore. Daniel did, and it made her feel weightless. After coffee, they walked through the botanical gardens. The late afternoon light filtered through branches, turning the air gold. Leaves rustled underfoot. She found herself telling him things she hadn't shared with anyone. How she sometimes felt like her success was hollow. How she longed to create something meaningful, a space where people could feel connected. "My mother used to say that every building should have a heartbeat," she said. "That architecture isn't just walls and glass, it's the feeling people carry when they leave." Daniel stopped walking and turned to her, his gaze thoughtful. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Victoria whispered. "I miss her every day," he nodded slowly. "I think she'd be proud of you, Tori." The name slipped from his lips naturally. Tori, the nickname only her family had ever used. She froze, heart skipping. "What did you just call me?" "Tori," he said lightly, then hesitated as realization flickered across his face. "I'm sorry, it just came out." I must have read it somewhere, maybe online? It's not online, she said quietly. No one calls me that anymore. He looked momentarily lost, then smiled gently. Maybe it just felt right. They continued walking, but the air between them had changed. Victoria tried to brush off the unease, telling herself it was coincidence, nothing more. Still, a question tugged at the edge of her thoughts. How much could a stranger know? Yet every time she looked at Daniel, the worry softened. His presence felt safe, not intrusive, not predatory, but familiar, like the voice in dreams you can't quite place when you wake. She decided not to press further. Not yet. Days turned into weeks, and what began as coincidence grew into rhythm. They met for dinner, for walks, for quiet moments that stretched into hours. Daniel seemed to anticipate her moods before she voiced them. When she had a bad day at work, he'd show up at her office with coffee just the way she liked it. When she mentioned a childhood memory, he seemed to know how to build upon it, finishing her sentences with uncanny accuracy. The logical part of her tried to dismiss it as intuition, as the strange chemistry that happens when two people connect deeply, but the seed of doubt continued to grow roots in the back of her mind. One evening, he invited her to his apartment, a modern space overlooking the river. The interior was minimalist yet warm, filled with light and shadow, art and silence. She moved through it slowly, admiring the subtle details, the shelves lined with books, the faint scent of cedar, the sound of the river beyond the glass. "This is beautiful," she murmured. "Did you design it yourself?" "In a way," he said, pouring wine. "I wanted a place that felt like reflection." As she explored further, her eyes caught on a framed photograph resting on a bookshelf. She stepped closer, drawn to it instinctively. The picture showed Daniel, a few years younger, standing beside a woman with kind brown eyes and a gentle smile, wearing a paint-stained apron, a brush in her hand. The world tilted. Her breath caught. That face, that smile, she knew it intimately. Her mother. For a moment, her body refused to move. The glass of wine in her hand trembled. The edges of reality blurred as her heart hammered in her chest. "Daniel," she said slowly, her voice cracking, "why do you have a photograph of my mother in your apartment?" He turned, the color draining from his face. For a heartbeat, he said nothing, only watched her with a mixture of sorrow and inevitability, like a man who had been waiting for this confrontation. "Victoria," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think it's time you knew the truth." She took a step back. "What truth? Who are you? How do you know her?" The questions burst out, fueled by fear more than anger. He approached carefully, palms open, tone steady, but filled with emotion. "Your mother was the most extraordinary person I ever met," he began. "Years ago, before you were born, she did something that changed my life forever. She saved me in a way you can't imagine. And when she passed, she left me a promise." "What promise?" "That I'd find you when you needed it most. That I'd make sure you never forgot the kind of love that makes people believe again." Victoria stared, her mind rejecting the words even as her heart recognized their strange sincerity. "That doesn't make sense," she whispered. "You're too young to have known her. She died 16 years ago." Daniel hesitated. "There's more to this than time, Victoria. Things your mother understood. Things about love, about connection, that go beyond years or logic. You felt it too, didn't you? The moment we met." "No," she said, shaking her head, backing away, though part of her knew he was right. "This is insane." "You're lying." He reached into his jacket pocket and took out something small, a silver locket, old and worn. He placed it on the table between them. "Your mother gave me this. She said you'd recognize it." Her hand trembled as she lifted it. The locket was etched with tiny initials, CH, and inside was a faded photograph of her mother holding a newborn baby. "That's me," she breathed. "How do you have this?" Daniel's eyes glistened. "Because she wanted you to find it again. Through me." Silence filled the room, heavy and fragile. Victoria's world spun, every certainty unraveling. She didn't know whether to scream or cry or run. But beneath the confusion was something else. a faint, pulsing awareness that none of this was random. She had felt it since the moment he said, "I'm your gift." The city lights shimmered through the window, reflecting off the surface of the river below. The sound of water against stone was steady, grounding. Daniel stood before her, a living contradiction, stranger and savior, mystery and truth. "I need you to trust me, Tori," he said quietly. "Not everything we love is bound by time. Some promises find their way back." Victoria's knees weakened. She sank into the nearest chair, clutching the locket to her chest. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You will," Daniel said gently. "Because this isn't just my story. It's hers and yours. And the part that begins now will change everything you believe about love, loss, and what it means to be found again." The promise unveiled for a long time after Daniel's revelation. The apartment was wrapped in a silence that felt alive, pulsing between them like a second heartbeat. The city outside went on as usual, traffic murmuring, sirens faint in the distance, the hum of unseen lives moving forward. But inside those glass walls, the air had turned sacred, heavy with questions that words could barely hold. Victoria sat unmoving on the edge of the sofa, the small silver locket still clenched in her trembling hand. Its metal was cool, grounding, real. She ran her thumb over the worn engraving again and again, as if it might give her answers her mind refused to form. Her thoughts were tangled knots of disbelief, wonder, fear, and something softer beneath it all. Something she dared not name. Daniel stood a few feet away, the light from the window tracing faint gold across his features. There was no arrogance in him now, no hint of mystery meant to impress. He looked human, vulnerable, even haunted. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, the tone of someone trying not to frighten a fragile thing. "Your mother and I met years ago," he began, each word measured. "Long before you were born. It wasn't in a way that makes sense in the normal world. I was lost, not just in the way people get lost after mistakes, but truly lost. I had no family, no direction, no reason to believe life still wanted me. I wandered until I reached a small coastal town, broken and desperate. She found me there, Catherine. She painted on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. She said she saw people in colors before she saw their faces. She told me mine was the color of stormlight, chaos waiting to heal." Victoria listened, her pulse racing. Her mother had always spoken in strange metaphors when she was alive, but to hear them echoed now from someone who shouldn't know them sent a chill down her spine. "She helped me," Daniel continued softly. "She didn't ask questions. She simply gave me food, a place to rest, and something no one else had ever offered: belief. She told me I wasn't finished yet, that I had a purpose still waiting to unfold. When I asked her why she cared, she said because the universe never sends souls to cross paths without reason. I didn't understand then, but she saved me. I built a life from that day forward because of her." He paused, his eyes distant, remembering. "When she grew sick, I visited often. She said she had one regret, that she wouldn't be here to guide her daughters through the hardest parts of their lives. She asked me to promise something that sounded impossible at the time, that when her eldest felt completely alone, when her hope dimmed to its faintest ember, I would find her. She told me I'd know her not by her face, but by her silence, the kind that hides heartbreak behind strength." Victoria's hands shook. "That's impossible," she said, her voice barely holding together. "You couldn't have known that moment. You couldn't have known I'd be there alone on my birthday." "I didn't," Daniel admitted. "Not until I walked into that restaurant and saw you sitting by the window. The rain, the candlelight, it was the same look she had the first day I met her. I don't have an explanation that fits logic, Victoria. I only know that I felt her there, as if she was whispering, 'Now go to her.'" So I did. Victoria rose, pacing the length of the room, her breath unsteady. "This sounds insane," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "You expect me to believe my dead mother sent a stranger to find me?" "I expect you to believe that love doesn't vanish when a body does," Daniel said quietly. "It changes form. It becomes something that moves through time, through chance, through people. Catherine didn't want you to live closed off from the world. She wanted you to remember that connection is what keeps us alive. She stopped by the window, staring at the city lights flickering below. Her reflection looked back at her, pale, eyes shining with confusion. She wanted to dismiss him, to label him a liar or a dreamer, but her heart refused to cooperate. There were too many impossibilities already proven true. The nickname he shouldn't have known, the locket, the way he spoke of her mother's phrases like someone who had heard them firsthand. And then there was the unspoken truth she hadn't dared to voice. Since meeting him, the emptiness that had shadowed her for years had begun to fade. She felt lighter, freer, as if someone had opened a window in her soul. Finally, she turned back to him. If this is real, if what you're saying is true, then why now? Why after all these years? Daniel's eyes softened. Because you were ready to listen. Sometimes we don't find what we need until the silence inside us grows too loud to ignore. You were at that table because your heart was asking for something only love could answer. I was just the messenger. The word messenger hung in the air, trembling with meaning. Victoria's knees weakened. She sank back into the chair, pressing the locket to her chest as tears blurred her vision. I don't know what to do with this, she whispered. It's too much. Daniel knelt before her, his voice steady and tender. You don't have to do anything. Just breathe. Let yourself believe that life hasn't forgotten you. The universe keeps its promises even when we stop expecting it to. For the first time, she didn't resist the tears. They came in quiet waves, washing through years of loneliness and unspoken grief. Daniel didn't move closer. He simply stayed there, silent and present, until the storm inside her passed. When the tears finally subsided, she felt emptied, not broken, but renewed, like the earth after heavy rain. She looked at him through red-rimmed eyes, and though she still didn't fully understand who or what he was, she felt something shift inside her. You're not normal, she said weakly, almost smiling. No one talks like you. He smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just someone who stopped pretending not to feel deeply. That night, she couldn't sleep. The city outside her window seemed to hum with energy, like invisible threads connecting every streetlight and shadow. She held the locket in her palm until dawn, thinking of her mother, of all the small, tender moments she'd buried to survive adulthood. Maybe she thought some love doesn't end. Maybe it waits for the right moment to return in another form. Days passed, but the encounter didn't fade like a dream. Daniel became a constant in her life, though their bond now carried a quiet reverence. He never pushed her for more. He simply walked beside her through parks, listened when she spoke, and sat in silence when words were too heavy. She began to paint again, something she hadn't done since her mother's death. He bought her brushes and blank canvases, saying nothing, just leaving them on her doorstep with notes that read, "She'd want you to finish what she started." And she did. Slowly, her apartment filled with color, blues like ocean calm, golds like sunlight breaking through sorrow, reds that pulsed with new life. One afternoon, as she worked on a large canvas, she realized she was painting a face. Not her mother's, not Daniel's, but something between them. An expression that looked both ancient and timeless, serene and knowing. When Daniel saw it, he stood in front of the painting for a long time before whispering, "She's proud of you." Victoria turned to him. "Do you still see her? Hear her?" He hesitated. "Not in the way you mean. But there are moments when I feel her near. Like now, in this room. You've called her back, Victoria. Not as a ghost, but as presence. The kind that never really leaves." That night, he told her something she would carry forever. The greatest love stories, he said, aren't just between people. They're between souls that find each other again and again, across lifetimes, across endings. Your mother understood that. She saw in you what she saw in me. A heart that refuses to give up on love, no matter how much it hurts. His words settled into her like sunlight through fog. She didn't know whether to believe in fate or miracles, but she knew this. Something sacred had found her through Daniel. Not romance, not coincidence, but a kind of love that transcended form. In the weeks that followed, Victoria began to change. She smiled more. She stopped measuring her worth in deadlines and accolades. She began to reach out, to her sister, to old friends, to the parts of herself she had neglected. Daniel never claimed credit for any of it. He only watched, proud, as if his purpose was simply to help her remember how to live again. Then, one morning, he was gone. His apartment was empty, his number unreachable. No note, no message. Only the faint scent of cedar and the locket she'd given back to him lying on her doorstep, as if returned by unseen hands. Inside the locket now was a new photo, not the old one of her mother, but a small painting. Her own, of the face she had just finished. Below it was a single handwritten line in Daniel's familiar script. When love finishes its task, it doesn't end. It changes shape. Tears blurred her eyes, but this time they weren't from loss. They were gratitude, deep, wordless gratitude for a universe that had found a way to keep its promise. She looked out the window as morning light filled her home, and she whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." "Mom, thank you for sending him." And though no one answered aloud, the air shifted, soft, warm, filled with the unmistakable sense that she was no longer alone. The colors of memory, the days after Daniel's disappearance, blurred into a surreal haze, as if reality itself had softened its edges. For the first time in years, Victoria's life was not measured in meetings, deadlines, or the quiet ticking of loneliness. Instead, it unfolded in colors, in the brushstrokes she left on canvas, in the warm hum of memories that now filled her once silent apartment. Every morning, sunlight poured through her window like a blessing, touching the half-finished paintings scattered across her living room. She no longer painted for perfection. She painted because her soul demanded it, because creation was the only way to make sense of everything Daniel had awakened inside her. Yet his absence was everywhere. She caught herself expecting his voice in the doorway, his familiar calm when the world felt too heavy, his laughter like soft thunder after rain. But he was gone, vanished without explanation, leaving behind only the silver locket and a line of handwriting that refused to fade from her mind. When love finishes its task, it doesn't end. It changes shape. At first, she told herself he would return. Perhaps he had to leave for work, or maybe something personal called him away. Days turned into weeks, and still there was nothing. His phone went straight to voicemail. His apartment remained locked and dark whenever she passed by. It was as though Daniel Cross had been a dream, stitched briefly into the fabric of her reality. Vivid, transformative, and impossibly real. One Sunday morning, as she stood gazing at the locket again, she noticed something she hadn't before. The faintest shimmer behind the tiny painting, a small, folded slip of paper wedged into the frame. Her heart skipped. Carefully, she pried the backing open and unfolded the hidden note. The writing was Daniel's, but the words were different this time. Hurried, emotional, written not for farewell but for guidance. If you're reading this, you've begun to see the truth I couldn't fully tell. There's a painting your mother left behind, one she never signed, one she said wasn't finished. Find it. Everything you need to know about me, about her promise, is hidden there. Victoria stared at the paper, breathless. A memory surfaced, her sister Emma mentioning years ago that their mother's final painting had been stored away in the attic of their childhood home, wrapped and forgotten. She had dismissed it then as one of the many relics of grief they couldn't bear to look at, but now the thought of it burned like purpose. She called Emma that afternoon. Her sister sounded surprised to hear from her. "Vic, wow, it's been weeks. How are you?" "I'm not sure," Victoria said honestly. "But I think I need your help. It's about Mom." And her last painting. There was a long silence on the line before Emma spoke again, her voice softer. "You really want to see it?" "Yes, I think it's time." That night they met at the old family house by the river, a place frozen in time. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust, and stepping inside felt like walking into a preserved memory. Their mother's presence lingered in every corner. The worn piano keys, the jars of old paintbrushes still crusted with color, the faint outline of her laughter in the silence. Emma led the way up the narrow staircase to the attic, carrying a lantern that cast trembling shadows on the walls. The painting sat in the far corner, wrapped in yellowed cloth. The sight of it made Victoria's pulse quicken. Together they knelt, untying the twine that held it closed. When they pulled back the fabric, dust danced in the lantern light, revealing a vast canvas covered in deep, swirling hues: gold, silver, indigo, and crimson. It was breathtaking, chaotic, and alive. At the center was the image of a woman, serene, ethereal, her eyes closed as if listening to something only she could hear. And beside her, faint but unmistakable, was the figure of a man standing by her side, his hand outstretched toward another. A woman painted in softer light, standing alone at the edge of the scene. The resemblance made Victoria gasp. The woman was her. The likeness was uncanny. The tilt of the head, the curve of the mouth, the eyes full of longing. Emma's voice trembled. "Vic, that's you." "I know," she whispered. "And that man, it's him. It's Daniel." Emma blinked, confused. "Who's Daniel?" Victoria took a shaky breath and began to tell her everything. The dinner on her birthday, the strange connection, the locket, the promises, the way he seemed to know their mother. At first, Emma looked skeptical, but as the story unfolded, disbelief softened into wonder. "You think he was sent by her?" she asked quietly. "That somehow Mom orchestrated all this?" "I don't know what I think," Victoria admitted, tears glinting in her eyes. "But he knew things he couldn't have known. He had this locket, Emma, and now this painting. It's like Mom painted a message across time." Emma touched the canvas gently, her fingers tracing the strokes that formed the mysterious man's face. "Do you notice the light?" she said suddenly. "Look, the man's body isn't solid. It's fading into color." She was right. The figure wasn't fully tangible. His outline shimmered, blending into the background of gold and light as if he were part of something not entirely human. The paint there had an otherworldly sheen, like the reflection of sunlight on water. A chill ran through Victoria. "She always said love could exist in forms we don't understand," she murmured. Maybe he wasn't just a man. Maybe he was something more. Something between worlds. They carried the painting downstairs and set it under better light. For hours they studied it, uncovering tiny symbols embedded within the brushwork. A star near the woman's hand, a faint infinity sign near the heart of the man, and a series of golden lines that seemed to connect them. In the lower corner, beneath a layer of varnish, they found an inscription so faint it was barely visible. Emma tilted the lantern. The words appeared, written in their mother's delicate script. "When the world forgets its light, love returns wearing a familiar face." Victoria sank to her knees. "She knew," she whispered. "She knew he would come." Tears streamed silently down her cheeks as her sister wrapped her in an embrace. The attic, once a place of shadows, now glowed with quiet holiness. They didn't speak for a long time. Words would have diminished what they felt. Awe, grief, gratitude, all interwoven into one heartbeat. Over the next few days, Victoria couldn't stop thinking about the painting. She brought it home, placing it where the morning light could touch it. Every dawn, she'd sit before it with her coffee, feeling an unspoken dialogue pass between her and the canvas. Sometimes she swore she heard her mother's laughter in the rustle of the curtains. Other times, she'd catch the faint scent of cedar, Daniel's scent, though no one else was there. Then one morning, she noticed something had changed. In the soft dawn light, the golden streak connecting the man and woman in the painting seemed brighter, shimmering faintly, as if alive. She blinked, thinking it was her imagination, but the glow remained. It pulsed softly like a heartbeat. That same day, an envelope arrived at her door. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. A seaside cliff she didn't recognize at first, until she turned it over. Written on the back in Daniel's handwriting were 3 words. "Come find me." Her heart pounded. Beneath the words was an address, a small coastal town hours away near the northern shore. The same kind of place Daniel had once said he'd met her mother. She didn't think twice. By evening, she was on the road, the locket hanging around her neck like a compass guiding her home. The journey was quiet, the sky bruised with twilight hues. The closer she drew to the coast, the more familiar it felt, as if the air itself remembered her. When she arrived, the sound of waves echoed against the cliffs. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, vast and alive, reflecting the fading light. She parked the car and stepped out, the wind tangling her hair, salt stinging her lips. There was no one there. Only the rhythmic crash of the tide and the whisper of seagulls. But then she saw it, an easel, standing alone near the edge of the cliff, anchored by stones. A canvas rested upon it, half-finished, its surface glimmering with wet paint. Her breath caught as she approached. The painting showed her, standing on the very same cliff, wearing the same coat, her hair blowing in the wind exactly as it was now. And behind her in the image stood Daniel, one hand extended, his eyes filled with light. Her throat tightened. On the corner of the easel, another note fluttered in the wind, pinned by a small brush. She reached for it with trembling fingers. This is where it began. This is where she found me. And this is where you'll understand. Victoria stood there, tears spilling freely, the sea wind wrapping around her like an embrace. The sun dipped lower, turning the horizon to molten gold. She felt it then, not just memory, not just grief, but presence. A warmth surrounded her. The same warmth she had felt the night Daniel said, "I'm your gift." She closed her eyes, whispering to the wind, "Daniel?" And though no voice answered aloud, the air shimmered with energy. A whisper, a sigh, a sensation of hands brushing hers. The sea roared louder, as if echoing something sacred. When she opened her eyes again, the painting on the easel had changed. The figure of Daniel had stepped closer in the image, his hand now resting near hers. The world felt suspended, poised between time and eternity. She realized then that the promise wasn't about his physical presence. It was about what he had awakened inside her. A connection that could never truly leave, because it was made of the same substance as love itself. As night descended, Victoria stayed by the cliffs, her heart steady and full. For the first time, she didn't fear the unknown. She knew deep in her soul that love, her mother's, Daniel's, the universe's, would always find a way back. The gift that remained. The sea had its own kind of voice that evening, a language without words, a rhythm that spoke directly to the heart. Victoria stood at the cliff's edge long after the last sunlight bled into the horizon. The canvas before her glowed faintly, as if the ocean itself had kissed it with light. Every color seemed alive, breathing. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she didn't need to. Some moments in life didn't require logic. They only asked for faith. The wind danced through her hair, carrying with it the scent of salt and rain. She closed her eyes and let it surround her. That unmistakable warmth she'd felt since the day Daniel entered her life. It was as if he was there again, unseen but near enough to touch. For a heartbeat, she felt a gentle pressure against her shoulder, the ghost of a touch, soft as breath. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and for once, she didn't brush them away. They weren't tears of loss. They were tears of recognition, of understanding, something deeper than grief could ever reach. She whispered into the wind, "I found you." And in that instant, something changed. The air stilled. The waves paused in their endless rhythm, hanging in suspension. A faint shimmer rippled around her, subtle but undeniable, a pulse of energy that seemed to hum with her heartbeat. Then, behind her, a voice, low, familiar, achingly gentle, spoke. "You always would." Victoria froze, every nerve in her body trembling. She turned slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast, the illusion would vanish. But he was there. Daniel, standing a few feet away, framed against the dying light. He wasn't solid in the way she remembered. His form shimmered slightly, as though he were made of light and air, yet his smile was the same, steady and warm. Her breath caught. "Daniel?" He nodded, and even that simple gesture carried a tenderness that broke her heart open. "You came," he said softly. You listened to her call. Victoria took a step forward, her voice shaking. Are you real? Am I dreaming? He smiled sadly. You're not dreaming, Victoria. You're remembering. This place, this cliff, it's where your mother's love bridged worlds. It's where she found me when I was lost, and it's where she made me promise to find you when the time came. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, but her hand trembled in midair. Why couldn't you stay? Because I wasn't meant to stay, Daniel replied, his gaze gentle but firm. I was meant to remind you, to wake something that had fallen asleep inside you. Your mother knew your heart better than anyone. She saw that you'd build walls so high that even love couldn't climb them. My being here wasn't about forever. It was about opening the door again. Her chest tightened with grief and understanding all at once. So you were never alive? He took a slow breath, the air around him glowing faintly with each word. Not in the way you think. I'm a memory given form, a piece of her love, carrying her promise forward. When she passed, she poured everything she couldn't say into one final act, a wish that love would find you when you'd forgotten how to feel it. The universe listened. And it sent me. The realization struck her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. It wasn't tragic. It was beautiful. A love that refused to vanish had found a way to live again. Through him. Victoria's tears flowed freely now, though her smile trembled through them. You were her gift, she whispered. But you said you were mine. I was both, Daniel said, stepping closer. She gave me to you not as a person but as a message. To remind you that love never dies. It changes shape. It waits, patient and silent, until the moment it's needed most. She felt the words like warmth in her chest, radiating outward, filling every hollow space. For years, she had lived like a shadow, surviving without truly being alive. Now, standing on this cliff with the wind around her and Daniel before her, she felt whole. What happens now? She asked softly. Daniel's eyes shone like silver rain. Now you live. You love. You create. You share what she gave you with the world. That's the only way love keeps moving, when it flows through us into others. He extended his hand toward her, not for her to take, but as a gesture of farewell. His outline shimmered brighter, blending with the air around him. The sea below seemed to echo his glow, waves catching the same golden hue that radiated from his form. Will I see you again? She asked. His voice softened into a whisper, almost carried away by the wind. Every time you paint, every time you love without fear, every time you look at the sky and remember that you are never truly alone, I'll be there. Then, like the final stroke of a brush, his image began to fade, not vanishing abruptly, but dissolving gently into the world, like sunlight sinking into the sea. The last thing she saw was his smile, serene and knowing before it merged with the horizon. Victoria stood there for a long time, the wind roaring, her heart both breaking and mending at once. The locket around her neck felt warm, almost pulsing, and when she opened it, she saw something new inside. The tiny painting Daniel had left was gone. In its place was a fresh stroke of golden light, glowing softly against the metal surface, shaped like a heart. She pressed it to her chest and closed her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, not to the sky, not to the ocean, but to the love that had woven itself through every impossible moment. When she returned home, she placed the painting from the cliffside against her living room wall. It looked different now, complete. The once unfinished light that connected the figures of the man and woman now blazed across the canvas in a radiant arc. Her mother's artistry and Daniel's spirit had intertwined in one masterpiece, and beneath it, in fresh, delicate script that hadn't been there before, were new words, glowing faintly like dawn. Love is the bridge between what was and what will be. She didn't try to explain how the words appeared. She didn't call anyone to witness it. Some things were too sacred to dissect. Instead, she did what she now knew she was meant to do. She lived. Victoria opened an art studio months later, calling it the Gift Gallery. It wasn't just a place to display paintings, but a sanctuary for healing. She taught others to use color as language, to turn pain into beauty. People came from far away to attend her workshops, drawn not by advertisements, but by word of mouth, by the warmth that seemed to fill every corner of her studio. Sometimes, when the evening light filtered through the tall windows, she felt a presence, quiet, steady, familiar, and though she never saw him again, she always knew when he was near. The air would smell faintly of cedar, and the golden light would shimmer across the canvases like breath. Years passed, but the story of that one birthday dinner never faded. It became the turning point of her life, the moment where sorrow turned into meaning, where loneliness was met by love wearing a stranger's face. On her 45th birthday, Victoria returned to the same restaurant where it all began. She sat at the same table by the window, now smiling at the rain outside instead of dreading it. When the waiter came with her wine, she ordered a second glass. "For a friend," she said softly. The waiter nodded politely and walked away, and she raised both glasses to the empty chair across from her. "To the gift," she whispered. As she sipped, she felt a whisper pass through the air, so faint it could have been the wind, or something far deeper. "Happy birthday, Victoria." Her eyes filled, but her heart didn't ache. Instead it glowed, full, peaceful, complete. She smiled, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the world fade into the warm hum of eternity. Because somewhere beyond sight and sound, she knew two souls were smiling back, her mother and the man who had once sat down at her table and reminded her that love never really leaves. It only changes its form, waiting for the moment when we are ready to believe again.